Hi everyone, so I'm here to do a video that I've never done before. It's a very popular video on the old YouTubes and I love watching them, but I've never done it like I mentioned, and that is a trash my TBR. So I don't know if it's just the whole New Year thing or what. I think mainly it's just lack of space, but I'm really trying to clear out some of my books. And there are a bunch of books on my bookshelves that even when I unhaul books, which I do fairly regularly, like I don't film unhaul videos because I don't tend to like stack up tons of books. I just get rid of a book after I read it. If I don't think I'll reread it, like pass things on to friends. It's been less common recently. But you know, I just sort of like regularly kind of just chuck out a few, if that makes sense. But there are always those books on my bookshelf that I've been there for years typically, that I always think, oh, maybe I'll read it. I'll keep it because maybe I'll read it. And some of these have been on my bookcase for more than 5 years and I still haven't read it. And why is that? That doesn't like scream to me that I probably am ever going to read it. And for that reason, I really just feel like I need that help. Like I need that push that I know that these videos are really good at doing to get rid of these books, because I have no space for them. I have way too many books for space I have. I don't think there's such a thing as too many books, but do you know what? I don't even have space for another bookshelf right now, so I really just need to like make some room. And I want to look at my TBR shelves and look at all the books I have to read and be excited about all of them. And these books don't necessarily just don't necessarily excite me, but I also just feel like there's something about them that's stopped me, if that makes sense, from getting rid of them in the past, and therefore I'd really like your feedback. I'd really love to know if you liked or disliked a book. Now, I think if there's a lot of people feeling middling about books, they're still going to go, but if you absolutely adored a book, then I might be willing to keep it. At the same time though, I kind of need to hear from those of you that didn't like them, because some of them I haven't actually heard that great things about, but I need to kind of figure out if that's the same reason I would dislike a book. So if you could basically do what this video asks you to do, if you could help a girl out, then please trash my TBR. I've got 10 books here. Would love to know why I wouldn't like them. Tell me the reasons why I wouldn't like them. Again, like I said, if you think there's a reason I would absolutely love them, then you can mention that too, but we're here to get rid of books, so at least 6 out of these 10 have to go. And with that being said, let's just like jump straight in, shall we? So one of the ones that's been on my TBR for such a long time is actually a bit of a classic, and that's The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. So this is like quite a classic fantasy book. It came out in 1968, so like I said, like a bit of a classic, been around for quite a long time, had a lot of influence on different writers, and know Peter S. Beagle's very well respected. However, it doesn't actually have very high ratings. I sort of picked it up because it's a classic piece of fantasy, but what I've learned over the years is there is an era of fantasy that I don't necessarily love, and just because it's a classic doesn't mean I'm going to love it, because the fantasy genre has grown and developed so much since then. Some of the things that were innovative early on have been done a million times now, and that's not to say these books aren't still important, but for a book that I just want to read for like pure fun, escapist enjoyment, am I going to get that from this? Are there fantasy books out there that I'd rather spend my time reading? I'd like to know, because I love the concept of this, The Last Unicorn. I love that it's a classic. I kind of would love to know what the storyline is, but at the same time I want something that is a compulsive, captivating read, and I read a lot of modern reviews of this that don't necessarily feel that way. So I'd really love to get your opinions on this. This is one of the ones that I'm the most reticent to get rid of, that's like I'm really struggling to part with, despite the fact that in like over 5 years I still haven't read it. I then have a book which I quite often almost get rid of and then don't, and the reason I keep it is the author. So that's Mr. Fox by Helen Oyeyemi. I love Helen Oyeyemi. I've read 3 or 4 of her novels, and some of them are absolute favourites. Some of them are more middle ground though, like her books are a little bit unpredictable for me in terms of whether I'm going to love them or not, but the ones that I do love, I love so much that it's worth like giving them all a shot, I feel. Or is it? Because the premise of this doesn't really appeal to me that much, and it's also not one I hear raved about very often, because some of Helen Oyeyemi's books get super high praise, they constantly get recommended, and for good reason, and I completely agree with that. But then there's others of hers that just don't necessarily get that excitement, and I have often fallen under the same reaction as the majority in that case. So I'm wondering if I would fall with the majority on this, and that this would just be a kind of mediocre read for me, especially since I'm not that appealed to the plot. It's about an author and his infatuation with one of the fictional characters he's created, and how she sort of manifests as a real person in his life that only he can see. Now, I think this could be a really interesting commentary on that sort of like, now that I think about it, like that ideal of creating these idealized fantasy women in fiction. But am I going to enjoy the storyline? Like, am I going to be invested? Am I going to care? Am I going to be swept up in it? I don't know. So I would like to hear if you've read this or not, and what you thought, especially if you've read other books by Helen Oyemi. My favourite by her is White is for Witching, so if you can compare the two, that would be really helpful. I then have a fantasy book, and to be honest, I have so much fantasy on my bookshelves. I have more fantasy than any other genre, and that includes both my read books and my unread books. And I own a ton, like I said, of fantasy books by women, because that's like my go-to. I love finding new female fantasy authors with who write books with female main characters. I love that. But at the same time, I have a bunch of them, and a lot of them sound quite similar. And given that I have so many, do I need to keep them all, or are they just kind of cluttering up my shelves and, like I said, taking away from that feeling that you get when you look at your shelves and think, I'm so excited about all of these books? So one of those is Ash Princess. This is one that I have heard such divisive things about. Some people love it, some people hate it. I'm looking for things a little bit more different than I've read before, and this sounds like it might be similar to a lot of things I've read before and I'm not necessarily obsessed with and feel I need to read more. So this is about a young woman named Theodosia, who was 6 when her mother, the Fire Queen, was murdered before her eyes. 10 years later, Theo has learned to survive under the relentless abuse of the invading Kaiser and his court as the ridiculed Ash Princess. So again, like I said, sounds similar to certain concepts I've read before, but not necessarily a bad thing. I'd just love to know if it's particularly unique, if it does anything different, if it is completely compelling, if the characters are completely wonderful, or if it's going to just read like something I've read before. And I should iterate in this video that I'm not saying any of these books are bad. I've not read any of them, and they might be the perfect book for you. I'm just trying to declutter a little bit, and if I'm not going to read a book in another 5 years, there's no point in it taking up space on my bookcases. So let me know what you think of this one. We have another fantasy, and that is Midnight Never Come by Marie Brennan. Now, Marie Brennan is quite a well-loved author. She wrote the Natural History of Dragons series, which is a series that, controversially, I'm not a massive fan of, but that's because I prefer my dragons to be like fully sentient, chatty, wise creatures from the get-go, and that's not what they are initially. I don't know about how they grow within the series, but it's not what they are initially in the first book, so I never felt that compelled by book one. It kind of disinterested me slightly. And this sounds really, really interesting. It's set in Elizabethan England and about the fairy queendom that coexists like underground with Elizabeth's kingdom, I believe. But my friend Jill, who I trust absolutely with book recommendations, we have a lot of overlap in taste, didn't love this book, and it sounds exactly like the kind of book she would love. Like, she loves fae fantasy, and she loves the history of the Queens of Kings of England and Scotland and Britain. And for that reason, I thought this would be like a 5-star book for Jill, but she said it was just a kind of meh book for her, so it makes me feel less excited, and therefore I'd like to know whether you liked it or not, and whether you think I'd like it or not, because Jill has kind of deterred me from that one. Plus, like I said, I didn't love Marie Brennan's other book. We then have one that unfortunately I have heard a lot of meh reviews for. They're not my reviews, so I don't want to like necessarily imply that I agree with them. It just makes me less excited about the book. And this one is Tentacle by Rita Indiana. So this is a sort of science fiction novel. It sounds kind of literary and surrealist, and it sounds like a massive blend of things. Like, the plot itself sounds quite confusing, to be perfectly honest, from the blurb. I'm not sure I could necessarily summarize it, but it's described as a Tempest meets the telenovela, which sounds so interesting. Tentacle is an electric novel with a big appetite and a brave vision, plunging headfirst into questions of climate change, technology, Yoruba ritual, queer politics, poverty, sex, colonialism, and contemporary art. I love the sound of all of those things. However, a lot of my friends also love the sound of all those things, read this. We were meant to buddy read it, and I just like didn't get around to it. Didn't end up liking it, so that kind of put me off. Like, I lost my excitement for it, and I need to hear more people tell me what they think of it. Like, just because something sounds like it's going to be a blend of everything you love doesn't mean it's necessarily delivered in the way you want them to be. So maybe I just wouldn't love this book as much as I expected to. So yeah, these are books that you can tell a lot of them I was excited for and just kind of lost my excitement for. Similarly, Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero. This is a horror mystery novel inspired by Scooby-Doo, as you can tell from the title, Meddling Kids. I'm not sure if it's I don't think it's actually about the Scooby Gang, but it's about a group of kids and their dog in the 70s that kind of mirror the Scooby Gang, but like a little bit darker. And this sounds brilliant because I love Scooby-Doo, but I have not heard the best things about it. I feel like I need to hear from people who know my taste and can tell me whether they think I'd like it or not. Because I do love horror and I do love Scooby-Doo, but maybe this just doesn't quite mesh those things as well as I would hope it would. So let me know. We then have one that I picked up in a charity shop for like £1 and thought, yay, another like YA fancy, this sounds fun, but now I just kind of have lost interest in, and that does happen sometimes when you pick things up super cheap because you just think this sounds like the kind of thing I'd like, and then you take it home and realise you have a million other things like that. It's about Fae and the world between the Fae and humans. It's set in 19th century England, which I do love. Like I love a 19th century British setting. And it's about Catherine, who lives in the human realm but is being forced into an arranged marriage in the Fae realm. So I'm assuming she is actually Fae born. Of course, she falls in love with somebody else though, and it's about escaping this arranged marriage, etc, etc, etc. Now, I've just never heard anybody talk about this book. Did I mention what it was called? Between Two Worlds? Between Two Thorns by Emma Newman. I literally never heard anyone speak about this book. I'd never heard of it before I saw it in the charity shop. So like I have really no expectations for this, which means you could really push me either way, to be honest. So let me know on this one. We then have one I've actually read about half of, or like a third of, I forget how much it was, but that's The Furies by Katie Lowe. And this I read up until a point in which, and this is kind of a spoiler, but I also don't feel that it is a plot twist in any way, so it doesn't ruin the story knowing it, and I think, like me, a lot of you would prefer to know going in that there is a sexual assault scene. So I got up into the point where there is a sexual assault. So what I'm trying to say is, I got to that point in the book, basically, and it threw me off. I wasn't expecting it. I prefer to know that kind of thing going in, and I wasn't in the right mood to carry on reading it at that time. Like, I wasn't in the right headspace. I have to be in a certain headspace to read about sexual assault, and I wasn't then, so I put it down. I've never gone back to it, even though I think it's a very, very intriguing premise, and it's very beautifully written. However, the fact that I've still not gone back to it in over a year makes me worried that I'm never going to go back to it. So I kind of need to know whether I should carry on. Like, is the rest of this book compelling enough that I should return to it? Or is the fact that I've still not picked it up a sign that I should just like pass it on, get rid of it? Let me know, because it's about a group of friends at high school. I say friends, it's a completely toxic friendship group who get sort of interested in witchcraft and doing dark things, but there's not necessarily any actual magic. It's sort of like The Craft meets The Secret History, if that makes sense, which sounds brilliant. Plus, at the beginning of the book, you know someone dies. It's one of those ones where you're told that there's a death, and then you flash back to all of the events preceding the death. So again, a little bit like The Secret History, which is a book that actually I loved, but there was a point where I was really bored. So maybe this is the same kind of thing and it's worth pursuing to the end, or should I just like look up the ending and move on? I don't know. All of these books I just don't know. Like, I'm not super excited to pick them up, but also like can't quite bring myself to get rid of. Like I said though, at least 6 of these are going, so let me know. We then have Devil's Day by Andrew Michael Hurley. Andrew Michael Hurley wrote The Loney, which won the Costa Book Awards, and I read, enjoyed, but didn't necessarily absolutely love. And I really haven't heard much about his other books. Like, The Loney got so much praise, and for me it was like a good but not amazing book. So the fact that I've then not even heard as much praise about The Devil's Day makes me think I'm just gonna like feel even more apathy towards it, if that makes sense. And this one says that after the blizzard of a century ago, it was weeks before anyone got in or out. By that time, what had happened there, what the devil had done, was already fable. Devil's Day is a day for children now, of course. A tradition is easy to mock from the outside, but it's important to remember why we do what we do. It's important to know why our grandfathers have passed it down to us. Honestly, I don't really know what this book is about, but I've had it on my bookshelf for like a few years now. I picked it up for £3 and thought, well, I liked his other book kind of, and I like literary horror, so maybe I'll like this, but still haven't read it. And it's been like 3 or 4 years. So please just tell me what this book is about, whether I'll like it, whether it's better or worse than The Lonely, because those are the things that I need to know. And then last but not least, sorry I don't actually know much about these books, but that's why they're in this video. I'm looking for your opinions this time around, you know. This is a give and take relationship. Then lastly we have Smiler's Fair by Rebecca Levine. This is the book on this list that's been here for the longest. I've had this book for over 5 years. I've had this book on my bookcase for like 6 years, I think, and I still haven't read it. It's the first in a fantasy series set at a circus, well, a fair, Smiler's Fair, and I literally don't know anything about it. I've not really seen any reviews. It doesn't have the highest average rating, but that's not necessarily indicative of whether I'll like it or not, because sometimes I am a sort of mid-range rating. It just means like people have had very like extreme reactions either way to it, and it might mean that I'm on the extreme good reaction, I don't know. So please tell me, have you read this? Like, it's been on my bookshelf for 6 years and it's never the fantasy book I pick up. So really, this one I feel like needs to go, unless you can tell me that it's the best book ever and that I will absolutely love it. This is going. Because somebody else might love it and actually read it, rather than it sitting in my home unread. Like, it's not because it's bad. It's just really going to waste being unread in my home. So let me know. Let me know about all of these books. I feel like this video isn't as interesting as it could be because these are books I don't know much about and haven't read, but I would really appreciate your guys' feedback on this one. It would really help me, especially since I'm feeling a bit slumpy and I feel like I need to revamp my bookcases and get rid of a lot of stuff that I'm not excited about anymore. And therefore we just, you know, really appreciate like your feedback. So yeah, these are the books that I think I'm gonna get rid of, and would love your encouragement to do so, unless you absolutely think I need to keep it. But until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye everyone.